With the breaking news and the tension between the U.S. and Iran at its most dangerous point in years. Iranian state television releasing this new video moments ago. They claim this video shows Iran's elite Revolutionary Guard capturing that British oil tanker. You can see them rappelling down there from some helicopters. In the meantime, this is where we're talking about. The Strait of Hormuz. Iran's seizure of that British tanker occurred right there, as you can see there, one of the busiest and most important waterways in the world for the oil industry. Of course, this comes as Iran denies President Trump's claim that the U.S. shot down an Iranian drone in the same waterway. The country's deputy foreign minister fired back on Twitter, saying the U.S. may have instead shot down their own drone. As tensions escalate, the U.S. is now sending hundreds of additional troops to Saudi Arabia, right over there, to a former U.S. base. The new deployment intended to counter the possibility that this threat from Iran is growing. For more, NBC's Hans Nichols is tracking the president and his movements in New Jersey today. And NBC News Tehran bureau chief Ali Arouzi joins us now on the ground in Iran. Now, Ali, we have these developments where we saw these new pictures that were released on Iranian state television today. Tell us a little bit more about it.
That's right, Candace. The Revolutionary Guard here just released footage a few hours ago showing a swarm of their speedboats, which has always been a very big concern for the U.S., surrounding this British tanker while helicopters are flying above and members of the Guard's special units are rappelling onto the deck of the ship, carrying machine guns, wearing ski masks. It's provocative, it's dramatic, and it's aggressive, and that's exactly what Iran wanted everybody to see. It's a clear message from Tehran that if their assets, their interests in the Persian Gulf, in their backyard, are put under danger, if they can't sell their oil, then they're going to make life very difficult and very expensive for everybody else that wants to use that vital waterway. Because if there are so many incidents there, then the price of insurance goes up. If you're talking about military escorts, that costs a lot of money. And when tensions like this spike, so does the price of oil. That's not good for the U.S., but it's good for Iran, who can't sell much oil. So the limited amount they can sell, they'd like to sell it for more. Now, part of a statement that came out from the Revolutionary Guard, which isn't shown in that video, interestingly, is that they say a British warship was also accompanying that oil tanker and tried to stop the Revolutionary Guard from seizing the British oil tanker. But the Revolutionary Guard said that the British warship was unsuccessful and they were able to execute their mission. Now, there's some 23 crew members still on board that tanker. It is now at the port of Bandar Abbas in the south of Iran. Most of the crew are Indian, some Russians. The Iranian authorities here are saying that they are going to question or interrogate that crew in part of a very full investigation. But tensions just keep escalating, Candace.
It would appear to be a big escalation indeed. Wanting to get Hans Nichols to weigh in on this because he's traveling with the president. But also of note, Hans, you covered the Pentagon for some time for us. Have we heard anything from the president? And what do we make of that move by the Pentagon to send additional troops to Saudi Arabia?
Well, the Pentagon deployment had actually been long planned. Now, it bears noting that there's been tension in the region for some time, but I wouldn't read it as a direct response to what happened either with the drone incident or the seizing of this British oil tanker. We're going to hear from Secretary of State Mike Pompeo here in just a few minutes. We'll see to what extent he tries to chart a diplomatic course or whether or not he's going to take a more bellicose approach and have that kind of rhetoric. What we saw from the president was a little bit of both yesterday. He said Iran is in big trouble. Iran isn't working out. He seemed to be saying that Iran is the problem. But at the same time, he almost seemed to be distancing himself to what the U.S.'s obligation is to the United Kingdom, saying, well, look, this is a British ship. We don't have really a formal written agreement. Of course, they are close allies. They are in close contact with their British counterpart. Here's what's happening right now. Western diplomats are trying to cobble together some sort of international coalition to protect these waterways. But the line from the U.S. is that the U.S. won't do all of the heavy lifting. And at the same time, the U.S. does have some assets in the region. As you mentioned, the Fifth Fleet is based there in Bahrain, and they are patrolling these waters both by sea and air. But given the amount of traffic that goes through there, it's very difficult to give every single ship an escort. We'll see in the next 24 hours what shape this coalition takes and whether or not it has the form and the function to actually take care of all those ships going through the Strait of Hormuz. But right now, diplomats are still talking, and we need to hear from the chief U.S. diplomat about what the U.S.'s course of action will be. Candace?
And Hans, I want to pick up on that. So Mike Pompeo obviously is traveling there with the president. I'm assuming they've had some discussions about these tensions. Did he plan to speak with the press, and will that be live, or what's the case?
We've got monitors up, so we expect Pompeo to be speaking live. I don't believe, I could be wrong here, but I don't believe he's traveling with the president. I'm pretty certain he's not here. He's elsewhere in the world on a long scheduled trip. So wherever Pompeo is, this is an opportunity for him to talk to the press. And when the press asks questions of him, I suspect a lot of reporters are going to want to know just what the latest is and what the U.S. posture is towards Iran at this moment, because again, the president's a little unclear on this. He seemed to be blessing this effort by Senator Rand Paul to serve as a mediator. At the same time, he just said Rand Paul was one of many senators that are out there. And at one point, he seemed to be suggesting that things are going to work out great with Iran. At another point, he said that Iran is in big trouble. So it's not so much mixed message, it's just inconsistent from the president, and we'll see if Secretary of State Pompeo can clear it up.
Yeah, and I should note to our viewers, of course, we're hoping to get that news conference or that statement from Mike Pompeo live. If that's the case, we, of course, will bring it to you live. We'll continue to monitor that and see what he has to say. Back to Tehran and to Ali, who's over there. Obviously, you get a sense that tensions are increasing. Is that what you're getting a sense as well there in Tehran?
Definitely. There seems to be an absence of dialogue. The rhetoric keeps heating up. And we've had a lot of close calls over the last few months, Candace. I mean, more than I've seen in the last 10 years that I've working here. I mean, it's been alarming how close everything has come over these last few months. But incredibly enough, I think both sides in this heightened tension have shown a modicum of restraint, and that's probably one of the reasons we're not in a conflict right now. But the longer this stretches out, the more heated rhetoric there is between the two sides, and the lack of direct dialogue, then we have the risk of stumbling into some sort of conflict by accident. And that's what's worrying everybody, that these two sides are not talking to each other. They're blaming each other. They're taking countermeasures for things the other side has done, drone for drone, tanker for tanker. And at some point, the fear is that this could run out of hand. At some lower level soldier could fire a shot, and then before you know it, we're all involved in a major war, which would be a very serious conflict with Iran because it has so many proxies spread across this region. This would not be a war isolated in Iran, but it would probably inflame the entire Middle East. So there's a lot of concern. And when I speak to people in Iran, regular folks here, it's a double whammy for them. They've been hit hard by economic sanctions, and they're terrified of a conflict looming around the corner.
Well, I think a lot of people join them in being terrified of a looming conflict, indeed. Our thanks to Ali Arouzi there in Tehran and Hans Nichols in New Jersey. Thank you, guys. Let's bring in the panel right now, because joining me is MSNBC national security analyst Ned Price and NBC News military analyst General Barry McCaffrey. Thank you both for joining me. Ned, I know that you're there at the Aspen Security Forum. What are you hearing there on the ground about the U.S.-Iran relations?
Well, we've heard from senior defense officials and senior administration officials here in an attempt, it seems, to tamp down tensions. There certainly has not been talk of any sort of imminent war, imminent conflict. And in fact, we've even heard from President Trump himself in recent days say that he does not want a war. But as the general knows better than anyone, that is not the question that is posed to the president in the Situation Room. Mr. President, do you want to go to war? I think what concerns a lot of us, and I think you will hear this quietly from administration officials as well, is that we could stumble into something we don't intend to stumble into. This is a strategy of escalation for the sake of escalation and provocation for the sake of provocation. And President Trump has made the decision, somewhat bafflingly, to surround himself with advisors who are hawks on Iran. People like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, who have long called for a military solution as the only way to ensure Iran remains without a nuclear weapon. And I think that is what worries many of us, is that even if there is not, even if we don't intend to go to war, that we could find ourselves in a precarious situation that could culminate in something that no one intended.
Yeah, a lot of people worried about the missteps or misunderstandings that could easily take place there in the Gulf. General, I want to get your take on that piece of video that Iran released just within the last couple of hours. Kind of interesting to see these masked men and masked people rappelling down onto that tanker. What do you make of that as you take a look at that video?
Well, look, I think Ned's got it right. Nobody actually wants war in the Persian Gulf right now, certainly not the Iranians, who, in the event of a high-intensity air and naval conflict, will lose a lot of assets very quickly. But the problem is it will horizontally escalate. And so the chances of the Iranians with long-range missile strikes destroying Saudi oil infrastructure, Gulf Coast states, bringing the Israelis into it with attacks by Hezbollah or Hamas are enormous. There's a red line here. If the Iranians go after the U.S. Navy, I think the outcome will be an immediate, significant U.S. military response. I'm not sure they know that. The Iranians are looking at Trump and saying, this guy doesn't want war. I think they're reading him correctly. But the problem is he's very impulsive, very unpredictable. The military assets are there. We've got a carrier battle group and a lot of land-based air power that could bring to bear in the problem. So, as Ned points out, the chances of miscalculation are significant.
Well, Ned, on the talks front, as you know, there are reports that the Iranian foreign minister met with Senator Ron Paul. Here's what the president had to say about that.
Rand is a friend of mine, and Rand asked me if he could get involved. The answer is yes. And if other senators asked me to get involved, I'd probably say yes, depending on who they were. We'll see what happens, but I have many people involved, and Iran is going to work out very nicely.
You know this stuff very well, and you know this region after being there in the Obama administration. What do you make of how this administration is playing out this entire game when it comes to Iran?
Well, Candace, I think one of the real dangers here is that the administration, at least heretofore, has not had lines of communication open with the Iranian regime. For each of these escalations, they've been conducted in a vacuum. And as your correspondent on the ground in Bedminster said, we've heard not just mixed messages from this administration, but a whole series of messages, some of which are entirely incoherent with one another. So those on the ground in Tehran could be forgiven for not having a clear picture of what it is that the Trump administration is trying to do. And I think if you were to ask 3 different Trump administration officials what their Iran strategy was, you'd probably get 5 different answers. So in my estimation, it's a good news story that Senator Paul reportedly met with Javad Zarif. I think, however, there are some, including some in this White House like John Bolton, who don't see it as a good news story. And I actually think that's why we learned of these talks. I think there are some in the White House, Secretary Pompeo in the State Department, who don't want to see this channel of communication succeed, who are concerned that Senator Paul brings to this question a very different mindset, a very different orientation than the strategy of maximum pressure and the strategy, in my estimation, again, of regime change in everything but name that we've heard from John Bolton and Mike Pompeo.
And General, last word to you on all of this, because we did note at the top of the show that we're sending some 500 troops to Saudi Arabia, to an air base that the U.S. hasn't used in some 15 years. What do you make of that?
Not much.
Okay.
Most of our air power and naval power is already in the region. If there's a significant escalation, you'll see 15,000 people head to the Middle East to support the air campaign. That's not going to happen. I think that at the end of the day, look, the economic blockade is actually working. I'm always surprised by that. In past years, it never seemed to do anything but punish the people and not the elites. In this case, the Revolutionary Guard, which is a semi-criminal economic organization, is suffering from being targeted by these counterterrorism economic sanctions. So we got to give them a way out. There's got to be a diplomatic engagement. The military power is there to back up a soft approach. It's time to start talking to them.
All right. Let's hope they talk, other than anything else. Ned Price and General Barry McCaffrey, our thanks to you. Up next, walking back.